They describe changes in the bones of males and females from the Neolithic period, females eating more wheat while men ate more meat. Some call that the birth of patriarchy. Some think meat is the solution to a long list of physical ailments. You've probably heard of the meat-only carnivore diet. On the opposite end of that spectrum, some think meat consumption is the root cause of global warming and urge men to adopt a vegan diet to save the planet. One thing should be clear enough. We can't even agree on what men should eat. If the contents of the brown bag you take for lunch cause this much debate, anxiety, and uncertainty, what else is confusing about being a man today? The answer? A lot.
Agree or disagree? One must be a carnivore in order to be a man? You're going to really enjoy the pulled pork we have for you in the tacos after the service, if that's who you are. And if you're a vegan, I apologize. I apologize. Look, the reason I showed you that is because I do want to admit, this morning, part of what we're going to look at is just the challenge that it is to figure out what it means to be a man in our society. But the truth is, all of you, every single one of you, have already made a decision about what that means. Consciously or subconsciously, we all have a script in our head as to what it means to be a man. I want to admit right now that I am going to primarily speak to men this morning, not just fathers, but boys and adolescents and young adults, and not just dads, but men, okay? But women, that's not an excuse to get your phone out and check Facebook, okay? Because I think there's something here that we all can benefit from and learn as well, okay? We've all made a decision, but not in a general sense, right? Like we can go on Google and find out that Google says, masculinity is a set of actions, behaviors, and roles generally, hot topic in our culture, generally associated with boys and men, right? And in some way that suits. But what about the more specific definition that you may have of what it means to be a man? Because here's the truth. Someone who isn't you has defined masculinity for you well before you knew what that meant, okay? So think about it. Before you were conscious about how you felt about masculinity, you were in relationship with people, right? You were hearing and sensing and bringing in definitions from other people, because masculinity is a social and cultural construct. We're getting messages from all over the place. The primary ones probably come from dads and grandpas and uncles and mums and our family, right? But that's not the totality of it. And here's the thing, because this was given to you, some of you felt like it was easy to put on, like a good-fitting jacket that just worked. It worked for your personality. It worked for your physiology, right? It worked for your psychology. It made sense to you. But I bet you if I asked you all to think about it, you know someone, maybe as close as your brother, or maybe this is you, who were given a definition of masculinity that doesn't fit well. That feels more like a weighted jacket than a good-fitting sports coat. And the problem is, every generation, we inherit and then we're tweaking it. It changes, right? Let me give you an example. I'm going to tell you about a world leader from history, and in a minute you can try and guess who it is, okay? So this world leader, okay, was the emperor over the largest continental empire the world has ever seen, okay? The king of the largest continental empire the world has ever seen. And in his mind and in their culture, they believed that it was his not just right, but duty to have as many children by as many different women as possible. And he ended up, historians believe, with over 1,000 kids. Does anybody want to guess who it was? Genghis Khan. That's right. Genghis Khan. So in Genghis Khan's day, it was culturally appropriate for a man to just sire as many children with as many women as possible. Now, don't ask me who came up with this idea, because it doesn't seem wise to me. But that was their definition of what it meant to be a man at the time. And that has spilled out over history. Do you know that 8% of all the men, this is a biological historians, 8% of all men still living in the region covered by the former Mongolian Empire share a single Y chromosome. And they believe that that links all the way back to these 1,000 children with Genghis Khan. If you do the math, 16 million men on Earth have the same Y chromosome that they probably got from Genghis Khan. That is 0.5% of the entire global population of men. That's wild. Can you imagine what Father's Day would have been like for Genghis Khan? Can you imagine how many questionably useful gifts he would get on one day? You guys are going to do so much better than that with your gift giving. But my point is, look, in the 13th century, in the Mongolian Empire, that wasn't considered immoral. But even in the 13th century, okay, there were other cultures that had a very different view. Like the 13th century is when France was establishing the University of Paris. The 13th century is when the English were writing Magna Carta. So even within a time frame, in different regions, in different places, it's difficult to pin down any single definition of what masculinity is. To some, Genghis's way of behaving was barbaric, and to others, it was totally normal. Because masculinity is cultural, it's learned, and it's reinforced. So let me ask you a question. If all that leads us to believe that masculinity, or the definition of what it means to be a man, isn't intuitive, what is your script? What script were you given? Who gave it to you? Who were the primary influencers in what you believe about what it means to be a man? For me, I can point to several things that just seem to be core to what my dad was trying to teach me about what it meant to be a man. You know, my manners and the way that I interacted with other people was really important. Working hard was really important. Sports were a part of how we expressed ourselves. And all that fit for me, you know? Like, I wanted to sit down and watch Blue Jays games and Maple Leaf games with my dad. Not so much on Sundays when we watched the NFL. I found that boring, and he always slept through it. But nevertheless, you know, those things that my dad passed on to me, they fit me well. But you know what didn't fit well for me? It's like I got the impression from my dad that every decent man knows how to fix things. And I do not. If you missed it a couple of weeks ago, I told a story about how I tried to put a guitar hook in our living room, and I couldn't get the anchor in, so there's still a big hole in the wall, okay? I just put a picture over it so nobody would know. And I'll tell you what, like, that's funny, but I felt so disappointed with myself because I couldn't get that stinking wall anchor to stay in the wall. Like, what kind of man doesn't know how to put a wall anchor in a wall without creating havoc? And so I went into the garage and nobody was around, and I threw my tools at the wall because that made me feel sporty and more like a man. Right? Like, it just, sometimes we have these ideas that we've inherited from nowhere, you know, except for our parents and our culture, right? And they're unique to us. What were they for you, if you think about it? You know, was it sports? Was it exceeding and succeeding at school? Have you been left with the impression that your income really matters and equates to how successful of a man you are? Maybe if you're really lucky, and I thank God that I feel like I was fortunate in this way, that your parents instilled in you the idea that a good, solid character matters. But not all of us got that either. So it's really confusing. And then you come to church. And everybody tells you that you should be like Jesus. Okay? And I'm going to give you all permission. Men, ready? You've thought this at one point or another. Okay? Maybe you have. Do I really have to be like sweet, passive Jesus? Is that really who I'm supposed to become? Sweet, passive Jesus. Because it's confusing on that level, because when we were dating our wives who bring us to church, they didn't want us to act like Jesus, right? It's okay if you laugh at that, it's fine. We had a different, somewhere we got married and we settled down and we had some kids, and then the narrative shifted. And all of a sudden, we're just supposed to be this, different human being. Why did the rules change? What happened? And is there any other options? Is it possible? Like maybe if I come to church, maybe I can choose my own hero. I want to be like King David. King David, who killed animals with his bare hands. I want to be that kind of man. Or, did you know that there's a Revelation Jesus? Now, if you're new to church, please don't run and read the book of Revelation after church today. It's quite confusing, and you probably need some help with it. But if you do read it, you'll find some things in there that are different to what most of the rest of the Bible talks about. In fact, in the book of Revelation, Jesus has like a gleaming white horse, like Gandalf on Shadowfax, right? He's covered in the blood of his enemies because he's used a sword that comes out of his mouth to slay all the demons and all the... Can I be like that, Jesus? Is that okay? Right? For some reason, the version that we get is the version who gives up his life. Right? This is what it says in Luke 23. Maybe we could change. Maybe it would suit us to change the biblical narrative. Now I'm gonna give you a warning here. This might be just a little bit irreverent. Okay, so I know that, and you can send me an email later if that's not good. I can always use correction. But maybe we would prefer this version of Jesus. The people stood watching. This is Luke 23. And the rulers, they sneered at him and they said, he saved others, let him save himself. If he's God's Messiah, the chosen one. And the soldiers came up and they mocked him too. And they said, if you are king of the Jews, save yourself. And wouldn't it be awesome if we moved verse 34 to after verse 37 and changed it a little bit, and Jesus said, Father, forgive them for what I am about to do. And he pulls the nails out of his feet, comes down off the cross, and he gets that sword that Revelation talks about. That is not Luke 23, just to be super duper clear for all of you. But here's why I say all of that. To admit that it's tough, that we live in a time, in a space, in a culture where defining what manhood is difficult. And even at church, right, you've got all these different ideas, because there's like versions of the church these days where it's like, some are really for, treating women well and women in leadership and all that kind of stuff. And some of them are like, the He-Man women hating club. And, you go to the conference and it's like, there are eagles flying and American flags and guns going off and monster trucks. And we praise Jesus in the middle of that somehow. There's no consensus unless we focus just on Jesus of Nazareth. And I say it that way intentionally, like the real Jesus. The consensus that there is a man who lived in history and he had this story told about his life. Jesus of Nazareth, who Matthew writes about, who Peter walked with, right? The actual man who lived. I am more and more convinced the longer I live and the more I think about it and the more I study and the more I try to figure out who it is that I can be, that Jesus of Nazareth, he gets rid of all of our misconceptions, right? He changes the narrative on what it means to be a man. Because Jesus of Nazareth is not just sweet, passive Jesus. He might not be David. He might not be the hero covered in blood, right? He might not be Braveheart. He might not be whichever, idealized version of manhood you've got in your mind. But guess what? He's not covered in the blood of his enemies because he's covered in his own blood for our sake. And looking towards Jesus doesn't mean we all become the same, but it would mean we all become better. Because Jesus teaches us about the intersection of strength and humility, right? Jesus is not just covered in his, he's tougher than Roman nails, even though he doesn't pull himself down off the cross, which is why the Bible refers to him as the Lion of Judah and the Lamb of God. The image that we get from Jesus is the perfect union of masculinity, where strength and humility, the desire to, yes, be strong, but also to serve others, come together in a really beautiful picture. And Jesus' final moments, those moments that we were reading of, you can't change them because that's where everything changes. Jesus' final moments on this earth, if you read the kinds of things that happen as he's marching to Jerusalem, which, by the way, the minute he turns to walk himself towards Jerusalem, we know that he knew what he was doing. And we knew that, he has said it before, that as he walked, that was the moment when he decided he would give everything for us. And if you can imagine this, here's Jesus walking towards what he knows will be his end. And he's still doing things like stopping to heal blind men, encouraging his disciples. At one point they go and they try to stop an overnight in a Samaritan village. And the Samaritans say, no, you're Jews, you're trouble for us. They know that Jesus isn't a good guy. And so they deny them access to their village. And the disciples, you know what they say? You remember this? Can we burn it down? Let's burn down the village because they don't want us to stay there. And Jesus is like, are you joking? No, you can't. You can't. Have you not been listening? You can't burn the village down, right? Jesus, even in his most dark moments, is still showing the beauty and the humility and the love that changed the world. So when the soldiers said, if you are the King of the Jews, save yourself, it would be wrong to read it in any other fashion than that Jesus refused to save himself because of his great love for us. What does it mean to be a man? Really simply, I think to be a man means to battle, to say no to ourselves so that we can say yes to others. And our world is going to push back on that definition. They are going to try their best to give us another narrative. Just look around the world, full of selfish leaders who don't seem interested in anything but their own glory and agenda. We have a better way in front of us. We don't need to submit to a story that just means we're going to keep bashing each other for our own agendas. There is a way to marry your strength and your humility so that the world gets better. And this is a fight. Men, listen. This is a fight we can all take part in. If you, at any point, have been given a version of what it means to be a man, a definition of masculinity that doesn't fit you, there is a new way forward in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, who, even though he was God, Paul reminds us in Philippians, didn't take that to his own advantage, but submitted himself to the cross for us. You're invited to follow the new script, to make Jesus the center of your story, to pursue a life of strength and humility. It doesn't mean that we'll all be the same, but it does mean that we'll all be better. I'm going to pray, and I think one of our staff are going to go and get the kids from kids ministry, because we're going to turn our attention to baptism here in a second. And to me, this is like the ultimate way of handing on scripts, right? This is the moment in which somebody says, yeah, I'm going to take that script and I'm going to walk it forward. I'm going to make Jesus the center point of my life. Some of you who have been here for a while are wondering, and have been all morning, when I'm going to address the rubber elephant in the room. Okay? Our baptistry is having, has been for some time, some trouble with its heat pump. And it was going to cost us a fair amount to get it fixed. So instead of spending that money, we decided to do it this way. And it was also just an opportunity that the staff felt to bring baptism sort of back into the room. Because to me, friends, this is like, you could talk about Life Sunday. We talk about celebrating what God's doing among us. This is the thing, right? This is the thing that we celebrate the most. The passing of scripts, the ability for people to say yes to Jesus in front of all of you. Then I just think, it's a party that we should all share. So I hope that you'll go with us on this journey. And if you have any questions about it, you can ask me later. We're starting to have some of our friends filter in.